Welcome to Talk in the Park, conversations with Paul and Noel, where we gather to think out loud about what it means to follow Jesus in our world. I'm your host, Paul Pyle, pastor of discipleship at Patterson Park Church. I'm joined by my co-host, Noel Burke, one of the elders in our fellowship. Noel, tell us what we'll be talking about in this episode.
Sure thing. Well, I'm really excited, Paul. We've been talking about doing this for a very long time.
Months.
Yes, a very, very long time. And we'll get to the how did we come to this. But today, we just want to talk about why are we doing a podcast? We have so many offerings to serve the people of Patterson Park Church. What's one more? Is this just a drop in the bucket? Is this to look like other churches? We want to explore the why and the what we're doing today. So let's jump right into it, Paul. So first question is, why are we doing this podcast?
Well, podcasts, the whole world of podcasts is new to me. I've been listening to audiobooks for decades. Back in the early 90s, my sister-in-law gave me C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters on cassette, read by the British comic John Cleese. It was wonderful. It was great. And that got me started. I was commuting by myself, and I listened to all kinds of things, audiobooks, cassette tapes, that goes that far back. But podcasts are different. They're more freewheeling, they're more conversational, they're not as linear, they're not as neat. And so I'm starting to listen to podcasts and starting to really enjoy them myself. But let me tell you a story. Once we started talking about a podcast, we had a weekend custodian here, Nate Lang, and he got very excited about the podcast idea. And he told me, he said, sometimes I'm here on the weekend and I get talking with one of our ministry leaders and I hear their vision and their passion for their ministry and what they want to accomplish. And he said, I found myself wishing our people could hear this. I wish other people could hear this. So that's one of the things that we want to do. We want to make the vision and passion of our leadership team accessible and let people meet our leaders. Noel, you had a story when you were in Kuwait that you thought of when we asked about why a podcast.
Yeah, you're probably thinking, how does a deployment have anything to do with a podcast? But I was teaching a Bible study while I was over there, and great group of guys. We went through a lot of great material, and I had a gentleman who came, I'll say midway through my deployment, and he just said, "Hey, is this a good group to come to if you're new to Christianity?" And I thought, well, why would I say no to that? And so I said, absolutely, come to this group. And I realized I need to disciple this guy, and I didn't have a lot of experience with that one-on-one. I would meet with guys, one-off situations, but it was never I need you to teach me how to follow Jesus. And so the experience that I had being discipled was to go through systematic theology. I had followed Jesus for a while, but I didn't know what I believed or why. I didn't have great conviction. And so I thought, that must be what I need to do. So I've got this brand new guy, and I thought, I'll buy his book. So we went through a systematic theology text, and as great of an idea as that sounded at the time, I think I crushed him with too much, too quickly. And I greatly, John, if you were listening to this, I greatly am disappointed in that approach, because I think it was so much that he just lost interest. And so, I want to help equip the congregation for, let's demystify this. This is not this huge, you have to be a pastor to do this, or you have to go to seminary to do this. This is something, as Christians, we help the next generation of Christians to follow Jesus.
Yep. And Noel, when you and I were talking about why we needed a podcast, you asked me a question that momentarily hurt my feelings.
Yes,
because
I
I
did.
said, well, we have the blog, and I knew that people were reading the blog. I get feedback almost every week from that. And you asked,
I said, how many people are reading the blog?
Now, that told me something. It told me, for one thing, that Noel wasn't reading the blog if he asked that question. And there are like 100 people, 150 people clicking on the link and reading the blog each week. So I was pleased with those numbers. But then I realized the people that give me feedback are all people from my generation. Younger guys like Noel, family, young ones at home, just don't have time to sit down and read. And so there's a lot of blog listening going on while dishes are being washed and lawns are being mowed and cars are being driven. So the podcast really is a new platform for us to get information, content out to our people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nick's doing a great job with student ministries, discipling our adolescents. We do have the blog that goes out, and you should check it out. It's on our main page under Resources, Discipleship Weekly. And between Joey and me, we've written almost 200,000 words there since November of 18. Noel, you should check it out sometime.
Yeah, and in fairness, I do read it, just not all the time, and I feel guilty because I know that's such good content, and every time I do read one, I'm like, man, that is solid gold. And then it gets buried in emails and time goes on.
Yeah, and guilt is the last thing. It's such a nasty motivator for spiritual formation. And, of course, our adult Bible classes. We have such a deep bench of gifted teachers here at Patterson Park teaching on Sunday morning. And we're going to add the podcast because we really feel like a younger generation will really be able to really access content that way. Okay, so Noel, why do we think that this podcast is going to serve our body? What's going to happen here?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to the whole story of who is reading the blog, and I know I'm thinking of the younger generation. I'm thinking of the families with young children who are going all day long, whether they have children at home, whether they homeschool, whether they have children in public or private education and they work. Sitting down and either going to a class or sitting down and reading a blog is often a luxury in that phase of life. But, man, if you're doing dishes after the kids go to bed, a lot of times you see people who are listening to a podcast. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a spiritually based podcast. It could be something related to sports or history or just all kinds of topics that are out there, and they're listening to that while they wash dishes or fold the laundry or whatever that is. And so I know that I have personally benefited from that. It's funny that you mentioned that your first audiobook was the Screw Tape Letters, because my first audiobook was the Screw Tape Letters.
Oh,
I was actually on my way to Kuwait. I was sitting on some Navy base, and I was waiting for the rotator to come pick me up, and I thought, I'm going to try podcasts. And so I downloaded the Screw Tape Letters, and I'm sitting in this terminal and listening to this and just thinking, this is insane, And that whole deployment, I was listening to audiobooks and whatnot that whole time. So, yeah, we hope that this reaches more people in the congregation. We are not seeking to become the number one podcast. We're not seeking to reach the whole world with this podcast. We want to serve you, Patterson Park Church.
We want to serve our people.
Yeah.
Right.
So our target audience are those of you who are here at Patterson Park in Beaver Creek, Ohio, in 2024.
Yep.
So what kinds of things, Paul, do you say that we're going to do? What kind of things are we going to accomplish on this podcast?
Well, here are some ideas that we've talked about. We certainly want to interview our ministry leaders, let them expound on their vision, their ministry. Occasionally we'll discuss blog pieces that have appeared in our blog. I'd like to interview some of our people about how they integrate their faith in the workplace. I think there's some great stories there. I'd like to talk to some of our people who are involved in ministries inside and outside of Patterson Park. As elders, we hear about people who are involved in ministries that we know nothing about. They're not Patterson Park initiatives, and they're doing such great work in our community with people. I'd love to talk to some of our people who are doing a good job evangelizing their neighbors, really reaching out to their neighbors. I want to talk about the role of parents in discipling their children, their believing children. We discipline our children to prepare them for adulthood. We disciple our children as younger brothers and sisters in Christ. And there's some overlap there, but there are different categories. We want to talk about various leadership roles in the church, and certainly we want to discuss books, which is one of the things we're going to do very soon. We're going to discuss a really good book.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing it comes to mind, we're looking at all those things, what do we hope to accomplish with this? I know I've often heard you say, Paul, that discipleship is a team sport. I would love if you'd comment on that, because I think it's important that we understand, like, we're not trying to do a one-size-fits-all, this is how you make disciples, and it looks exactly the same for every single person. Although when I look at how I make disciples to how you make disciples, there are differences in how we accomplish that. So we are not advocating a one-method piece here, but we are advocating go and make disciples in the way that God has gifted you.
Right.
But tell me, like, what is that, team sport concept?
As I've read the literature on discipleship, I keep seeing this over and over again. It's like everybody's picturing a disciple maker sitting across the table, breakfast or lunch, with a guy with a guy, a woman with a woman, one-on-one, one-on-few. And I just realized not everybody cut out for that. And that is that vision of disciple making as a hero disciple maker, pushing out content to people, and discipling people in those intimate relationships. That probably owes more to Western individualism than it owes to the Scripture. And so I want us to think broadly, and maybe we'll have to devote an episode to this later, Noel. I want us to think broadly about what disciple making looks like as a team sport. In a team, everybody has a job. You find your job, you do your job well, and you trust other people on the team to do their job well. And not everybody's cut out to be meeting with people one-on-one, one-on-two. And so I want to make discipleship accessible for everybody. Disciple making isn't an extra credit optional assignment. We're all called to make disciples. But how we do that will be according to our gifting and calling and passions, and not according to a pre-described template.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh, now I'm going to feel guilty,
right,
going back to that guilt as a motivator, we are not here to make you feel guilty if you're not, making disciples in a traditional sense. We hope that this is an encouragement to you to say, okay, I can be part of this process that the church is doing, and it may look different for each of you that are listening. And so I think please do not be discouraged by the conversations we'll have about discipleship. May it encourage you and equip you and prepare you for serving the Lord.
Mm-hmm. So, Noel, introduce the next topic. What are we going to talk about in our next episode?
Yeah, so in episode 2, we're going to actually interview Nick Boucher, and we're going to hear his testimony. We're going to hear, what he's doing at Patterson Park. Obviously, if you've been here over the last, half a year, you know that he is transitioning student ministries pastoral position. So really excited to interview him and hear what he is doing and his vision for the youth.
All right. Thanks. We'll see you next time. Join us next time for Talk in the Park, Conversations with Paul and Noel. Be sure to check out the Discipleship Weekly blog. Look for it at pattersonpark.org under the Resources tab. Talk in the Park is a production of Patterson Park Church. Audio engineering by John Ambrose. Music composed, performed, and recorded by Jason McClurg. Talk in the Park is copyright Patterson Park Church. No duplication or copying permitted.